So, for people who don't know me at all, which is probably 99% of the people in the room, hello. My name is Matta. I'm a games developer. I've been making games for about 15 years now. Um, I'm also an associate professor of video game development over in the Netherlands. So, I've traveled through 9 time zones to be here today. Hello. I have no idea what time of day it is. But apparently Joe doesn't either, so I don't know where he is. It's an interesting thing we've got here because Joe actually works in a very, very different way from myself. Joe is very much making games for the bear community, whereas my approach is quite different in many respects. And I think actually it's quite a nice compliment with the panel that was going on before this, which was talking about the need for getting diverse voices into games. One of the things I find interesting about this is that I'm one of those tricky, problematic people within the LGB community, LGBTQIA, in that I'm the B part. Hello, I'm a bisexual man. Hi. And with all greatest respect, I do sometimes get the question of why are you here? As I stand there with my female partner, who is a wonderful, wonderful woman and the love of my life. And I kind of sometimes get that question in gay places and gay spaces and safe spaces and queer spaces and all kinds of lovely, lovely, welcoming spaces. And they get that question of, why are you here? It's like, interesting. Because I also get that if I'm there with a guy in a straight space. And so you kind of have this thing of like, okay, I'm a bisexual man who's not really welcome in straight spaces or gay spaces. And I would have thought that in gay and queer spaces, that would be a bit more easy. So that's an interesting thing in itself. So I'm writing a game, and I've created a game called Fragments of Him. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we came about to make this game and the story in the game and sort of why it is the shape it is. Fragments of Him is a narrative-based experience. We call it a playable interactive narrative experience. Mostly because we like the acronym, which is PINE. Playable Interactive Narrative Experience. It sounds nice, but I think we've got to recognize at the moment that there is a kind of a trend in games going on, which is to make things which are not necessarily the classic staples of games development, which are kind of fun or excitement or horror. And if you kind of think about most games that have been made in the last 30, 40 years, those are the kind of things you're going to get there. Our one, it deals with love. Really, I mean, that's the one real overriding emotion in this whole game. There's melancholy, there's hope, there's a little bit of laughter, and a little bit of sadness. And trying to create something which is that truthfully emotional is the key part of the experience there. For me, that meant it was naturally necessary to have a diverse cast. I think that's trying to deal with real emotions in that way. You need to have real everyday people. And I don't know about you, but not every person that I know is a white cis male, middle class to upper class with a large weaponry collection. Fortunately, I actually don't know many people with a large weaponry collection. I know a few who've got medieval swords. Not quite the same. About 2.5 years ago, some students of mine were just finishing up their degree, and they said, "Hey, could we? Do you fancy doing a game jam together? We want to make something." And I'd been teaching about narrative, storytelling, and how to tell stories with gameplay mechanics and with the world that you're creating there and the different things you could do with that. And I'd had this idea about a game based on a relationship breakup. And the game jam theme that year, this was for Ludum Dare, also pronounced Ludum Dare, was minimalism. And so 4 o'clock in the morning, I turned it on because it was on an American time zone. 4 o'clock in the morning, I turned on my phone, minimalism. And I was thinking, okay, why would you live in a space where everything has been stripped away? Why would you live in a room where everything but the barest essentials were left? were the only things left in there. And the answer was it was too painful. The memories associated with everything else was too painful. From that came a story about a man who was removing everything from his life, which reminded him of his partner. I went to the team at SassyBot, and being Dutch developers, I live in the Netherlands these days. I am English, you may have noticed from the accent. I grew up in London. But I live in the Netherlands, and being lovely, lovely Dutch people, I said to them, I'd like to make this a gay relationship. And they went, yes. I went, just checking, you know, there's going to be some people out there who are going to be perhaps a little bit annoyed about that, maybe. And they went, yes. Because Dutch people are kind of awesome a lot of the time. The Netherlands is quite interesting in that you have this kind of weird balance in there. That, in one respect, is incredibly progressive, really, really progressive. Gay marriage was legal in the Netherlands, I think, before anywhere in the rest of the world. Smoking marijuana has been legal over there for goodness knows how long. But they've also got this other thing in their society, which is really, it's like, it takes all those things and then it kind of goes, you can do all of those, that's absolutely fine. So why would you be any different? And that's interesting. It's quite conservative in some respects. There's this idea that, I can't remember the exact translation of the phrase, and it uses the word normal very heavily, so I apologize if the word normal really, really annoys you. But it's just like, just be normal. And any Dutch person knows exactly what just be normal means, but to the rest of the world, we're like, what do you mean by normal? Normal is a really laden word, because I think every single person in this room is normal to me. You all seem very, very normal, and you are all absolutely different from each other, because being different from each other is normal, in my opinion. But in some societies, that is not quite the case. So it's interesting that that kind of makes it stick out. So we made a game in a weekend. It's a game about a man coming to terms with the loss of his partner. And the game's called Fragments of Him. And it's about kind of piecing back together the parts of this man's life, the man he's lost, and coming to terms with that. Now, we put that online, and within half an hour of putting that online, we had people emailing us going, oh my God, I've been in floods of tears. I've just gone and woken up my boyfriend to hug him at 3 o'clock in the morning. He's slightly annoyed I was hugging him at 3 o'clock in the morning, but thank you. Thank you so much for writing this game. That was an incredibly moving story. Now, we had that from gay community, especially. But also, interestingly, we had a lot of that from, actually, I don't know the gender orientation or sexual orientation of a lot of the people. They're writing things like, that reminds me so much of when my father died. Or my sister died 6 months ago, and I'm halfway through your story. I'm at that point of denial. I still can't face up to the pain of it. But thank you so much for showing me there is an end to this. Now, this is a story about a man who's lost his male partner in an accident. And you're having people talk about how that speaks to them about loved ones. Now, for me, that is actually stepping outside of this boundary of what we consider a gay story or a queer story or alternative lifestyle story. It is those things, but it's a human story. And actually, for me, progress is about showing that all of us are human. All of us have these emotions. All of us, if we live long enough in our life, are going to lose somebody who really matters to us. And on that day, it doesn't matter whether you're straight, gay, trans, cis, lesbian, queer, intersex, asexual, whoever you are, on that day, you're going to feel the same way as everybody else. And so trying to show that commonality, trying to show that core humanity to all of us, for me, I think is a really, really important thing. And then I come to one of the words in this panel. So myself and Joe, I've not actually met Joe before, so he could actually be sitting in the audience laughing at me at this point. I don't know. Myself and Joe, we had a little interesting discussion about this by email beforehand, because he makes games which are very gay oriented. They are for gay men. And my approach is to make games about people who love each other. And by the nature of it, you get a diverse cast. Now, by this I mean, I've got 4 characters in my story. I've got Will, the man who dies in an accident. I've got Sarah, who's his ex-girlfriend from university, and you have the story about how they become friends. I've got Mary, his grandmother, who is about 67, getting on for 70, about the time the story is happening, most of the story is happening. And you've got Harry, his boyfriend at the time of the crash. Will is a bisexual man, and Harry is gay. Sarah is heterosexual, and in her 20s, and Mary is also heterosexual, and she's past retirement age. For me, I could not tell this story with anybody other than those people. It's absolutely fundamentally necessary to have those characters in there, to tell the perspectives, to have the attitudes, to make the way they think make sense. The way to make this story make sense, you need to have those people in there. I couldn't write it with a cast of entirely white men, whatever their orientation, and whether they're cisgendered or transgendered. I could not write this story that way for them because it wouldn't be right. Those characters would not speak to me in the way I needed them to create that story. So for me, diversity in my cast was necessary to be creative. And I think that's something that we've got to remember here, that diversity is not something that you push into your game. Your game can pull you towards it. Your game can be going, put different people in here if you want it to get better. And for me, fundamentally, that's what this is very, very much about. It's about my game pulling me towards diversity. I saw earlier today on a thing of like, oh no, it's not a game pushing the gay agenda, is it? The gay agenda. Wow. Now, it could be that the gay agenda exists, and as a bisexual man, I've not been forwarded my copy yet. It could be. I don't know. Is there a bisexual kind of addendum? Do we have an appendices at the back? If bi, turn to page 14. I just don't know, really. And I find it's very, very odd. I mean, what is this gay agenda supposed to be? I mean, for me, like I say, I think it was absolutely 100% necessary. Excuse me a second. It was... Woohoo! I can undo a bottle with 2 hands. For me, it was 100% necessary to have these characters in there. I don't think this could have worked in any other way. This is not about pushing a gay agenda, but obviously I do believe very strongly that diversity improves games. Now, one of the things that we have a lot in these kind of conversations is about what we call a kind of the strong white female lead, or strong white woman in the games, or strong woman in games. Usually it's a white woman, because apparently having non-white woman is even too controversial still for most games. And anyway, oh, by the way, I fully appreciate the irony of a white cisgendered man sitting up here talking about diversity. I give talks about diversity across Europe, and I've done it a couple of times in America. And basically, a lot of the first 10 minutes of the talk is me talking about my privileges. So I'm white. I'm mostly cisgendered male. I'm a bit fuzzy around the edges, but yeah, I'm fairly comfortable with being male. I'm fairly well educated. That makes a huge difference. I was born into a middle-class family. Makes a huge difference. My parents are still together. Makes a huge difference. I'm tall. That makes a huge difference. And that's really weird, that is such a fundamental difference in life. I'm 6'1", which is about 185 centimeters. I can never remember whether, in America, do you do feet and inches or do you do centimeters? Feet and inches, okay, I'm 6'1", which is quite tall. In the Netherlands, actually, that's the average height. Weird. And I get off the plane in America, I'm like, hello, small people. But it does make a difference, and if you don't think it makes a difference, then you look at the average height of the person who wins American presidential elections, and if you look at the things of comparing the main candidates in presidential elections in America since they've been televised, about 95% of your winners of your elections was the tallest person. I would love to think that tallest people have better political policies. I would love to think that's the reason why you always vote for tall presidents, but I suspect it's probably not. And so being a tall man, that apparently makes me look like a leader. We could keep on going. I've had a lucky life. I have. I've also been threatened to have people come around my house and beat the shit out of me because I'm bi. I've been unwelcome in gay clubs because I'm bi, and I've been unwelcome in straight clubs because I'm bi. I've been shouted at with abuse on the streets. I've had people knocking on my door. I had a gang of guys banging on my door at university. Bearing in mind I lived on the 3rd floor, so the only other exit was through the window, wanting to beat the shit out of me because I wasn't straight. So I've not had it entirely lucky, but on the scale of things, frankly, I'm a fucking lucky bastard. Really. And I'm completely aware of this. The ridiculous thing is that because of all those privileges, I can more easily get in front of a crowd and talk about these things without the risk of threats to me afterwards. And so very, very much I'd like to say to you, I thoroughly endorse the message from previous speakers, which is get diverse voices around you. Follow people on Twitter, look at who you're following, find friends who have views outside of your own and from lifestyles and communities outside of your own, because we all live in our own little bubbles. I suspect probably almost 100% in here are on the side of the Democrats, for example. Very useful occasionally to see people who support Republicans, just to find out how the hell that makes sense to them. I'm not saying go as far as listen to Trump supporters, but just do try and find other voices around outside you, because I think it really helps. So yeah, like I say, I'm aware of the irony of me sitting up here and talking about these things. But one of the things I want to talk about a little bit is the diversity representation in terms of women, especially in games. That there is this idea about the strong woman lead. I, of course, agree that we need those, but I also want to see weak women and cowardly women and clever women and stupid women. I want to see all kinds of women in games, because I think it's only then that we actually get proper representation. Because at the moment, we've kind of got two versions. We've got sexually objectified women, and we've got strong women. And we're kind of afraid of trying to put anything else in there. Or certainly, I know a lot of developers are afraid of trying to put other people in there. But I think actually we only get proper representation of women, like we have proper representation of men, when we actually have all the spectrum in here. And actually, I think once we get that whole spectrum in there, women in bikinis. Yes, women in bikinis exist. I have gone to a beach. I have seen them. I know they exist out there. Strong women, I've worked with a large number over the years. They're awesome. I know they exist as well. And I know a hell of a lot of other types of women exist out there as well. So why is it we're only feeling like this one's perfectly okay and this one we've seen too much of? And in the end, we're going to see too much of both of them. And eventually, we're going to end up with just as shallow representations of women as we already have. So I think actually we need to have different types of women, the full spectrum of women, like we have the full spectrum of men. Like if you look at Penguin in Batman Arkham Knight, he's overweight, he's short, he's angry, he's British. And when was the last short, overweight British woman who's angry that you saw in a game? Have you ever seen that character in a game? Sorry? Umbridge, J.K. Rowling. Harry Potter, there you go. Harry Potter, the answer to all things. Well, Harry Potter's got his own problems with gender, but let's not go into I could pick apart J.K. Rowling's writing. This is, I think, is one of these really, really important things, which I think Anita Sarkeesian said in her first Tropes versus Women thing, which I think is so, so important. That it's possible to both love a medium and love a game and have problems with it. So I think Batman Arkham Knight has got incredible mechanics, really great gameplay, and there's a hell of a lot of really good writing in there. There's also massive objectification of most of the women in that cast. And I know some of the people who work there. I know some of the people who work there have a problem with the objectification of women in the cast. So why isn't it changing? Why isn't it changing faster? And if we know that the people in AAA games dev have a problem with this, what's holding us back? Is it just that we haven't seen other people try things? Is it fear that they're going to do it wrong? I know there are some devs who are just afraid they're going to do it wrong. So they stick to what they know is safe. They know that if they make a sexually objectified woman, they're going to go, okay, there she is, and they know they're going to get they're going to get flack for it. But they know a lot of people are just going to go, yeah, it's another one. And they're afraid, I think, almost if they do a woman who is not that people are going to go, oh, well, you tried, but you got it wrong, and now it's even worse. And they might be right in some ways. And it's this kind of thing of like, I don't want to give brownie points for people trying, but I can also respect that people try. And I find this is difficult. And I think we need to, as like I say, the last panel did a great job of saying, we need to get more people on board. So we can do this better. We need to be better at writing real people, because I think that's what we need to get to here. We need to write people like you all, not just like a little bit more like me. So when I was writing fragments of him, I was talking with my partner who's worked in care homes, and she's worked with the elderly a lot, and she did the placeholder voiceover for that character as well. And she's going, oh, I feel dirty reading these lines because it is so much like some of the bigoted people I've known. Now Mary is the grandmother in the game I'm making. And Mary is a woman from a certain generation. She's from a kind of the Second World War generation. And she has old-fashioned beliefs. She is not particularly comfortable with gay relationships. Writing her was really difficult. And the thing is, though, it almost comes back to that same thing you say about games, that you can love games and still have problems with them. I love that character of Mary, and I've got major issues with her. And trying to write her and show that you can love someone and still not like them that much all the time, that's a really important human experience, I think. That feeling of being there and kind of going, oh man, I wish you hadn't said that. I think we've all done that with grandparents. Coming up to Christmas, good luck everybody. And with all these times, there are these moments and people we love in our life, we just kind of go, oh no, not really. And some of those people we feel comfortable enough with to go, okay, so what you just said, let's talk about that for a little while. And some of them you just go, okay, I'm going to let that slide. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think we all feel a little bit dead inside when we do that. But equally, we know that we love these people and they matter to us, and actually hurting them on that day, at that moment, would do more damage than any positive thing we could say to them to try and help them change. And maybe some other day, in some different place, it will be okay to raise it with them. So I was fortunate enough to have a brilliant actress play Mary for us, and I think she brings it to life. She really brings the complexity of this to life. And you know you're doing good writing when you've got a woman who's been working in television, film and theatre for 40 years, sitting there reading your script, and she read out one of the lines, and then she just stopped. And she looked up at me and went, oh my God, I said that to my grandson 2 weeks ago. And now I'm reading it in a script. And now I see the person who said this in the script. And I see that I don't want to be like that person who said that. And I thought it was perfectly fine when I said that. I thought that was okay to say that to a little kid, to say, boys don't cry. And you know you're getting somewhere when you've made a brilliant actress stop with your script and just go, I've just seen myself through a different light. Wonderful actress, really brings that character to life. Now, in terms of the theme of this talk, which was about making queer games, I think the word queer is really interesting because queer is about context. Because every single person in this room is normal for this convention. And every single person in this room might not be normal in everyday life. And like I say, I apologize for the use of the word normal. It's a difficult one. But this is the thing, I'm trying to work out what is queer. Now, in the context of games, having a cast which is half women is queer. Having an old woman on a cast is very, very queer. But that wouldn't be what we'd normally consider queer. We've got a bisexual member of the cast. That most people would accept as queer. We've got a gay member of the cast. So that's considered queer. So it's a very interesting and contextual thing. And so trying to work out exactly what queer means, and also where people are comfortable and where people are not comfortable with these things. Like I say, Joe, when we were putting this this panel together, he was saying, "Well, I'm making gay games. Queer is okay, but I'm making gay games." And so again, within these boundaries, within our own spaces, we find it. We're more comfortable with some names than others. Now I work at a university in the Netherlands, and universities are actually often very conservative associations. They are quite stuck in traditions which go on over the years. And it's a relatively young university. It's about 50 or 60 years old now, I think, 50 years. And so when I use the word queer there, when I say I talk about queer theory or queer studies or queer culture or queer lifestyles, you kind of go, isn't that an insult? Depends on context. Because I've been called queer and found that quite offensive, and I've been called queer and I found that a lovely compliment. And it depends on the context and how it's said and who it's said by. These things are really complicated. Another thing that could be considered queer is that the game I'm making has no difficulty, no puzzles, no timers, no challenge. It doesn't get harder as you play. There's not a boss fight at the end where you have to wrestle Mary to the ground or something. I don't know. You will be more liberal and progressive in your views. No, everybody cares for each other and everybody respects each other. Even though they might not necessarily agree, you can still love people. I think that's really the kind of the important message here of these kind of things. So that in itself is a queer gameplay mechanic. And it's interesting to see that with something which I think Joe was going to raise was how technology is changing games development. Things like Twine empowering people who have very low programming skills, very low visual skills in terms of creating graphics or audio and interactions. And it's actually empowering all kinds of voices to get into games development. And I think something we've seen over the last sort of 4 or 5 years is a real huge growth in homegrown, underground, small games, little games that are just telling a tiny fragment of somebody's experience. I think that's a really, really important thing. I think the technology is empowering us to change the way that we are telling stories in games and really bringing forwards voices that wouldn't usually be traditionally in there. I've talked a little bit before about how I feel very lucky. I've had access to technology in one way or another for most of my life. Not the best, and I was living way under the poverty line for most of my 20s. But if I was really stuck, if I really needed help, there was always a safety net out there. And that's a huge difference between the poverty I was in and what I would call true poverty. I was just earning very little. Very, very little, living off very, very little. That wasn't actually poverty because I still had a safety net. Poverty is when you're on that level and don't have the safety net there. But because of that, I've always been able to find ways to create And I've always been able to find ways of using that technology. And that's made me very comfortable with technology. I think what's really important about the way the technology has changed are things like Unity becoming free, essentially. Unreal 4 becoming sort of free, essentially. Twine definitely being free. I think this is really important because it does empower a lot of other people to tell their stories and get those games out there. I fully encourage you all, when you find a game which is saying something you find important, please share it with others around you. Please share that message. Please share that game so other people can play that experience. So I think it's a great medium for conveying experiences that we don't traditionally have in our everyday lives. I keep on thinking Joe's going to walk in and go, "Hi, everybody." No. So yeah, I think the technology we're using is helping us create queer narratives and queer games outside of the normal expanse of what is considered video games. And I think in terms of mechanics, we've got to look at how these are queer too. The undermining of expectations in games, like a game that gets easier as you play it. That's an interesting thing. And then using something getting easier as you play it as a metaphor for life. See? I'm a lot more comfortable with myself now than I was 20 years ago. My life inside my head is much, much easier now. I have had problems with depression. I've been probably borderline alcoholic at one point in my life. And life is much, much easier now. It got better. And that's also a really important message. It gets better. It gets easier. Life is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And sometimes you just got to stick with it. And trying to tell that in a game, trying to tell that through mechanics, what a powerful thing we can do there. What an amazing thing we could do with gameplay mechanics to create these things. And by creating easier tools and letting more people get to those tools who haven't had the fortune that perhaps we have had. Bearing in mind that every single person in this room is privileged right now because we are in a space which is both safe, we could afford to be here, and you could afford to spend an hour of your life listening to some guy talking about queer video games. Man, we're lucky. We are such lucky people to be here right now. And it's easy to forget how fortunate we are sometimes. And it doesn't mean our life doesn't suck a lot of the other times, but we've got a lot on our side already to be here. Which I think is probably quite a nice point to say, does anybody have any questions? I don't know how long I've been talking now because I didn't look at a phone at all and I was expecting Joe to be here to kind of go, oh, that's an interesting thing. I shall bounce off of you. Hey, that's 40 minutes. That's quite a nice time for questions here. So we've got some down the front here. Let's pass around the microphone. Oh, yeah, we got another one there. There we go. Awesome. So questions.
So you were talking about the character of Mary, and specifically, I find there are a lot of questions that I have internally more than anything about how it is to write a character that maybe I've interacted with someone like that in my life, but I've not lived inside their head. I don't know what their experience, their subjective experience of life is. And the last thing I want to do is project the way that everyone has projected on me what it's like to be a bisexual man, or what it's like, what my wants are, what my desires are, how I think about things.
Yeah.
How do you write a character like that? And especially, you were saying about reaching out to go, I need to go outside myself and get more. What do you do?
I'd say there was kind of two major points there. Obviously, like I say, one of them was checking with my partner who's worked with a lot of the elderly to go, would the elderly that you've worked with really say things like this? And a lot of the time I'd got it right. But there were a few things she said, no, they just wouldn't say it like that. So it is about checking with people who know, checking with people who've worked with that community or who are in that community to make sure you've got it right. So talk to people, listen to their feedback, find out from people who have these experiences whether you're going in the right track. So that's a really, really important one. And I can't emphasize that enough. And again, I think the last panel really nailed it with surround yourself with diverse voices. And I don't mean just race, color, orientation, these kind of ethnicities, different groups, and that kind of thing. I also mean age groups, social groups, class groups, different jobs and lifestyles. Just really, really, diversity is in so many ways, and it's so easy to miss these things. So look for everything out there. Surround yourself. Um, the other thing that I think is really, really important for me is something which is horrible to face up to and really disturbing in some ways. Um, but I think it sort of makes life easier if you accept it and then begin to internalize it, which is every single person in the world thinks they are justified in what they are doing all the time. They think they are justified. Now, they might know they're being an evil bastard at that point, but they think they're justified in being an evil bastard at that point. Now, that's an interesting thing, because you can have people who are doing things that you massively, massively disagree with, and even they maybe think are horrible, but they're doing it because they think it's okay because somebody did it to them, or that they never saw a different kind of life. And so Mary, for example, all of the characters in the game, they've got pages and pages of backstory. I know how Mary came home during the war when she was a little girl, and her father was sitting there quietly by himself in a room, and she didn't know that he didn't know she was watching, and he started crying. And that's never in the script of the game. You'll never know that. But that was part of who she is. And so understanding how she became who she is helped me understand why she could say things I disagree with and get inside her head. And she lived in a time when the woman was expected to stay at home and be a good wife. But actually, she's probably one of the smartest people in that cast. But she never got to go to university. She never got to have a career. And so when her husband, who was a writer, and he worked for a local newspaper, she thought, well, he could have done better. Now, actually, her frustration with him really wasn't frustration with him. It was frustration with herself for not being able to do it. It was her frustration with society for not letting her do it. And then her son, well, he started running a couple of pubs in London, and just pleased he ran a couple of pubs in London, but they were a bit punk. And they were a bit alternative. And really, did he have to do it like that? And he's got so much potential. He could do better than running a pub, couldn't he? And really, because she's got potential, she could have done it if society had let her. And actually, she could have been the CEO of a corporation very, very easily. She could have made a huge difference in the world. She's a great organizer. She's smart. She's intelligent. She could be a great communicator if she'd actually been allowed to go into spaces where communication was an important skill for her to develop. But she never was. And you can't help but think that those things twist you up a little bit inside. And going through that life and getting to that point, again, these things don't really, they're there. They're there when I'm writing Mary, when I'm hearing Mary in my head talking to me. That's the voice she's using, but that's not necessarily what's get written on the page. It's what informs what's get written on the page. So even if you're writing people you don't like, you have to understand who they are and how they got to be that way. Because everybody thinks they're justified all the time. And like I say, it's actually a horrible, horrible thing to face up to. So when Donald Trump says all Mexicans are, yeah, Donald Trump thinks he's justified. That's a weird thing. Now, does he think he's justified? Does he think it's true? And there's a different question. Or does he think he's going to get more votes because of it? And that's an interesting question. Does he really believe these things? I don't know. But I think he thinks he's justified in saying it because it will get his ring. It might just be he thinks he'll get votes, and we'll come to your question in just 1 second. He might be he just thinks he's going to get votes, and he might think that he's going to be the best president of America. So no matter what he says now, it'll be outweighed by the good he'll do when he's the leader. And so he'll say anything to become the leader because he thinks when he's the leader, he'll do good for everybody. And so he'll lie his ass off now if it gets him into the place he needs to be. Now, I don't think he'll be a good leader. But maybe he will. I doubt it. Uh, but that's an interesting thing. And so even somebody like that, who I massively fundamentally disagree with in so many ways, if you can see where they're coming from, why they think they're okay with what they're saying, it helps you write them as a character. Cool. Next question.
So I'm really interested in story and the power of story and why we tell stories. And it sounds like, unfortunately, Joe isn't here with us, but you two are writing stories for different purposes. And you're writing a story that involves queerness, but it's really to connect with people on a fundamental level because of shared human experience. But then you said at the beginning that Joe is really writing games directed at gay men. And I'm interested within the spectrum of queerness and video games and why we make these video games. What's the worth of these two different ways we can approach storytelling?
So picking a particular audience rather than a general audience. That's a very interesting question. Give me a second. I want to give you a good answer. For me, there's two things about what I'm doing and when I'm creating. I am interested in, I would like the world to be a nicer place. I would like the world to be a more understanding place, more patient. And I think being patient is a very, very important thing. And being kind and understanding love and letting love in your heart is a really, really important thing. I think it's very important to represent all kinds of lives as happy, positive things that you can have and that you can be. You have so much more in common with every single other person in the world than you have things different from them. And actually, I think that's an important human experience to try and emphasize. Equally, though, trying to make something for a specific audience, I think that's also really important because if that audience hasn't been addressed much before, you're going, you are valued. You are welcome here. Come, we want you in our group. And I think sometimes you need to actually specifically reach out to a particular audience and go, come, join with us, play with us. Have fun. You are welcome in this space too. So I think that's probably where Joe's coming from more. Also, I think he just loves making games. He's a gay guy and wants to represent his life in games. Nothing wrong with that. Neither approach is right or wrong. It's just kind of different approaches, I think. I'd love to have talked more with him, and I hope he comes along sometime and talks to you guys. Maybe next year. Yeah, another question there.
Thank you. It's been a very good presentation. You asked before if there is any video games we'd played recently that had short, ugly women in it, and I could be completely misremembering it. So it was okay if I throw out the title anyway.
Sorry, which one?
I'm not sure if I'm remembering the game correctly, but I think the last game I played with that, as far as short, ugly British women goes, is Ni no Kuni, The Wrath of the Winter Witch.
Ah, I've not played that one. A few other people seem to be nodding in agreement there, so yeah, it sounds like they're out there. It's great. Hello. Okay, we have 5 more minutes and she's going back in 2. Cool. Are there any other questions at this point? Yes, another one there.
What's your favorite color?
What's my favorite color? I'm going to be horribly gender stereotypical and go blue. But it does bring out my eyes, so I think that's a good excuse. I'm also
really
Aquarius. And I don't think it matters. I am not that keen on long walks on the beach. It gets sand in my shoes, and I find that really uncomfortable. Yeah. I've got a question down here.
Technology is changing the way that we create the games and making things more accessible. So, do you consider it a double-edged sword? Because we can get awesome games like Fragments of Him and all the other games that teach us and like bring out values, positive. Yet at the same time, we get games like Faggot.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
I have a fundamental faith in humanity being a good thing in the end. And I hope the positive games will outweigh the negative. I'm a very hopeful person. I see people in this room who are capable of love, capable of sharing their lives with each other, and I hope your voices will eventually outweigh the voices of the people who hate us. That's fundamentally what I've got to say. And you all support the games you love, make games you love, because we need to spread that message. There's enough hatred in the world already. Yeah. I guess that's the answer to that one. I am a bit of a hippie, I think, in heart sometimes. I become more so as I get older. I've got another question over here.
Hi. I'd just like to say thank you for talking about diversity and saying that it's not about like objectification or strong women, but that there needs to be a large variety, and that's really the most important aspect. I think when people get introduced to the idea of alternate kind of females in games, they're a bit abrasive to it at first because they don't realize that it's not like someone's taking something away or that they're saying you can't like something. It's more about having that variety and showing that there's more than just 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions. There's a lot of different dimensions, and that's really important to emphasize.
Yeah.
Especially here.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I think we need to bring in that diversity, literally even within the kind of the subcategories. We need to get that diversity in there. Absolutely. I am very, very much a sex positive feminist. I very much think that sex is a fantastic thing between consenting adult or adults. I think that's a really, really nice thing. And I think that this should be embraced. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being sexual. I don't think there's anything wrong with having sexual women in games, sexual men in games, sexual non-binary or agendered people in games. I think that's a very, very awesome thing. But I would like them to be treated more often as people in control of their own sex, their own sexuality, and in control of their own lives, which at the moment isn't so often. But like I say, I think if we actually got that full spectrum in there, I think the objectification would be one aspect of that, because that happens in society, and I think we need to keep on representing things in society. Like there is porn made by people who are absolutely choosing to be in that space, doing those things, choosing to make their life that way. Fuck yeah. Let people control their own lives. Let people, if they fucking love making porn, go for it. That was the last bit I thought I'd get cut for. But I also think that there's a lot of people who are stuck in that space without any choice of being there, and that's a fucking awful thing. So we need to help those people get into a space where they're either happy doing that work or happy outside of that work. So it's about recognizing the complexity within these industries. And this is the thing that I don't think there's any kind of black and white. Anybody who says the answer is definitely this is probably wrong about pretty much everything in life. Pretty much everything in life. So I think we need to recognize the complexity of these things. But I think if we get that whole life in there, we get that kind of sex positive kind of side to it as well, I think we can really just help media reflect the world we want to live in. Because I think there is this feedback loop between the media and our lives. And I think the most conservative voices in games are often the voices that deny that media affects us. And if media doesn't affect us, why does the advertising industry even exist? That's just like the most fundamental principle. Adverts make you buy stuff. Otherwise, that industry would not be there. It's one of the biggest industries in the world, and it's built on the fundamental principle of messages in your media change your behavior. In this case, through buying stuff. And that's the most basic way of rating. Did you see enough of those messages that you then were more likely to buy it? Well, okay, if that works, how many times do you have to see the message of sexual objectification or women being treated as second-class citizens before you think that that's normal? To me, that seems like a no-brainer question, but other people deny that that's actually a factor that happens. So I think that's a fundamental difference there between conservative voices and the more progressive voices. But I'm hoping that people begin to see that that is very likely the truth. Like I say, advertising is fundamentally based on that bet. So we need to try and make our media more positive, and hopefully we'll change the world to be slightly better as well. This is not saying that media is the only thing that can change the world. You need to do actual action of going out there, supporting causes that you like, go volunteer, give money to charities that you agree with, do other things other than just support and retweet, Do go out there and make an actual difference, work with communities, talk to people, listen to people. God, listen to people. And the homeless community, for example, is one of the groups that is never listened to. And just having their voices listened to, people taking on board their opinions is such a huge thing. We need to start looking at the way these people get to these lives, and whether they choose to be there or whether they're forced to be there. So listen. work with each other, make nice things, do brilliant, brilliant things. And queer games, hopefully, will be a tiny part in making this world a better place for all of us. I think we better wrap up there. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. Thank you. Cheers.